Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the National Atomic Testing Museum's Distinguished Lecture webinar featuring William Ted Hartwell, who will be speaking about the 40th anniversary of the Community Environmental Monitoring Program. My name is Joseph Kent, and I'm the Director of Education for the National Atomic Testing Museum. It's wonderful to have you all here tonight. Thank you for joining us. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday and also a Happy New Year so far. Just wanted to make a few announcements before we introduce Ted. The National Atomic Testing Museum reopened recently on January 2nd, 2021, following the holiday break that we had. We're open to the public Thursday through Sunday by reservation only. And please be sure to visit nationalatomictestingmuseum.org to reserve your tickets. And we also have a brand new exhibit at the museum entitled COVID-19, Battling the Invisible Enemy. This exhibit highlights the work being done by the Department of Homeland Security's Science and Technology Directorate in supporting the country's COVID-19 response. Now, I'm going to go on to introduce Mr. Hartwell, and just want to let everybody know we will have time to ask Mr. Hartwell some questions following his talk. So that'll be available in the chat if you'd like to type any questions you have, and you can do that throughout his talk, and we'll ask him the questions once he's done. So just want to let you know you will have time to ask him questions. Now onto the introduction. So William Ted Hartwell has an MA in anthropology from Texas Tech University and has been a member of the research faculty of the Desert Research Institute in Las Vegas, Nevada since 1991. Mr. Hartwell is the project director for DRI's Community Environmental Monitoring Program, or the CEMP, which is funded by the U.S. Department of Energy's National Nuclear Security Administration through its Nevada field office. Previously, Mr. Hartwell had archaeological research that focused on 3 geographic regions: the Southern Great Basin, the Southern Great Plains, and the Pampas of Argentina. Specific interests have included hunter-gatherer lithic technology, catching behavior, quarrying behavior, and soil formation processes. Now, Mr. Hartwell is also the principal investigator of a research study examining the impact of problem gambling in Native American tribal communities here in Nevada. He currently lives in Las Vegas, where he is also a professional cellist with the Las Vegas Philharmonic, a devoted husband, and the proud father of a precocious 15-year-old daughter and 3 cats. So it's my pleasure on behalf of the museum to introduce you to Mr. Ted Hartwell.
Thank you very much, Joe, for that very kind introduction, and welcome everyone. Thanks for coming out for what is probably your umpteenth virtual presentation to participate in over these past 9 months. I know it's been a difficult time, but I wanted to wish everybody a happy new year. I think better times are ahead. I'm hoping by late spring or early summer, we'll all be able to gather again for these presentations and share some hors d'oeuvres and good conversations. But I want to thank the museum for inviting me to participate in the lecture this evening, which is really going to be kind of a look back on 40 years of the Community Environmental Monitoring Program, which is the off-site radiological monitoring program around the Nevada National Security Site, which most people still know as the Nevada Test Site, if you've been around for any length of time or so. What makes this project particularly interesting is that it is a citizen science project. So it actively involves members of the participating community in the collection and dissemination of data from the program. It's really, I think, one of the longest running, continuously running citizen science programs probably in the country. There are certainly a few that are older. One that comes to mind is the Audubon Society's annual bird count, which I believe has been enlisting assistance of citizens since the late 19th century. So it's been going for quite a while, but it's an amazing testament to the commitment of individuals in these communities, as well as the Department of Energy, to put the trust in DRI and the funding of and continued operation of this program. As I mentioned before, it is the off-site radiological monitoring program around the site, which means the monitoring stations that I'll be talking about are set up in communities for the most part, both surrounding and downwind of the Nevada National Security Site. I'm not going to PowerPoint you to death tonight. I am going to take you through some features of the website a little later on, and I'll show you some of those stations and what they look like. But I'm hoping to have a little more of a face-to-face personal conversation with plenty of time for questions and answer here at the end. So I promise you'll have that. The program, interestingly enough, had its genesis in the accident at the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania way back in 1979. And that accident was a fairly serious technical accident, did involve the meltdown of one of the cores, but the safety systems and the design of that plant functioned as they were supposed to, and largely contained the radioactivity within those vessels. But there was a tremendous amount of public fear about that accident. The information that was being reported in the media and what they were hearing from plant operators and from the government often directly conflicted one another, and people really didn't know what to believe. And so they were tremendously fearful about that. There were a number of individuals actually deployed from the Las Vegas area at that time, both from the Department of Energy as well as with the predecessor, well, I guess it was Environmental Protection Agency at that time, but from the lab here in Las Vegas that were deployed to assist with the monitoring and response to that accident. And while they were out there, an interesting thing happened, which is that a group of independent citizens got together and formed an independent monitoring network because they were distrustful of what they were being told by virtually everyone. And they wanted to get themselves trained, which happened with, I believe, Penn State University, as well as EPA participated in that process. And at the end of the day, it resulted in a network of monitoring stations set up around that plant with private citizens who were volunteers in different areas of the communities surrounding the plant, who were the day-to-day operators of those stations that took samples from those stations and were the first line of communication with other members of their community. And this program was so successful in helping to improve the public confidence of the monitoring itself that a number of the individuals who were deployed from the Las Vegas area and worked out on the then Nevada test site said, you know, we've got a lot of similar trust issues with people in the communities around the site, a lot of the same fears. Why don't we take our existing monitoring network, make it more publicly visible, and identify private citizens who reside in these communities surrounding the site who are willing to take on the responsibilities of learning what the equipment is, how it works, how to take the samples, and serve as communicators basically within their communities to their neighbors who had concerns or questions either about what was ongoing at the site or about what had happened in the past. And so that was really the genesis of the Community Environmental Monitoring Program. Back at the beginning, only had, I believe, 14 stations, and that expanded over time. When testing was still ongoing, as it was until 1992, it did contain a number of other pieces of equipment. They were looking for things like noble gases, one of the fission products of nuclear testing, as well as things like tritium, atmospheric tritium. And so there were a number of different types of sampling instruments located at the station that are no longer there simply because we don't do that type of testing and haven't for nearly 30 years in that case. So The process of involving those citizens basically was identifying two people in each community who were generally respected by other members of their community and willing to take on the responsibilities necessary to learn about ionizing radiation, what it was, what we know about health effects, what we don't know about health effects, and who could be educated to probably respond to maybe 80 or 90% of the questions they might get from the general public in their area. So in a very real way, they become the lay experts in their communities on this issue and on the issue of ionizing radiation. And the participation of the local community members has a number of very significant benefits to the program. In fact, I would say they are the lifeblood of this program. The individuals who were responsible for putting together this program, I like to call them the three founding fathers, represented multiple agencies. From the Desert Research Institute was Mr. Nate Cooper, who's been long retired now. I guess in a way, all of these guys have been long retired, but a couple of them, Bruce Church, who was with the Department of Energy at the time, and Chuck Costa, who was with the Environmental Protection Agency at the time, are both still very active with the museum and the Nevada Test Site Historical Foundation to this day. So it's wonderful to pick their brains and hear their stories from the early part of this program. And a number of you may have heard them talk on some of these subjects before. And so DRI's role at the time was really the identification and of those community members, helping arrange the training, and also helping arrange the town hall meetings that often resulted from announced tests in advance, to come out also and talk about people's concerns about things such as fallout or other activities that were going on at the site. And so, it's one thing for somebody from the Department of Energy to come out into the communities and say, we're monitoring and everything's okay. What is that? There's that famous Ronald Reagan statement, I'm here from the government, I'm here to help. There's a lot of general distrust sometimes about governmental agencies in general. And so that's one level. It's another level for someone such as myself, associated with the Nevada system of higher education, that hopefully has some pretty good credibility as the state agency, but someone like myself who is removed in both kind of time and place from those activities as they were occurring, to go out and say, yes, we're running these monitoring stations, here's how they work, and you don't need to worry, et cetera, et cetera. But it's another thing entirely to have somebody who lives in your community, often has lived there multi-generationally, grew up, throughout the period of testing, or whose parents grew up throughout the period of testing, understands culturally the fears that existed in the community, understands the concerns that exist today, and who has been educated on all the instrumentations and, again, on the science of what we know about effects and things like that, to answer questions directly from their community. So this is really about establishing trust in the monitoring program, and the participation of the community members, a large portion of whom are science teachers, either at the high school or college level. We've actually got a couple middle school teachers as well, but many who are not teachers. Again, really the only criteria was that they be generally respected members of their community and willing to take on the responsibilities. So we've had postmaster generals, we've had county commissioners, we've had bishop in the LDS church, all of these individuals who expressed an interest, a concern themselves over past activities perhaps, and wanted to be part of the process of learning about these activities and communicating them in a way that was beneficial to their community. So that, in a nutshell, is what the program's about. I do want to mention a couple important transitions, I guess, that happened during the history of the program. It started all the way back in 1981. I recall hearing anecdotes about how the Department of Energy at the time was really worried that there was going to be very high turnover among the community representatives on this program, and that was going to lead basically to maybe less communication, certainly less continuity and knowledge about the program and past activities. But in fact, exactly the opposite has turned out to be true. In fact, over the past 3 years, we've had 2 individuals retire from the program who had actually been with it since 1981. Most recent was Del Sullivan, who served as a community environmental monitor out in Alamo. I think he's probably close to 90 years old today, and he just retired a couple years ago from the program. Another one, John Lyle, out in Beatty. But I think, and this is one of the things I've most enjoyed, I think, about my own participation in this program, is getting to know the community representatives, because they present, again, a very broad range of personal experiences and backgrounds, but what they have in common is a desire to learn about this program, about the history of things like atomic testing, again, what we know about ionizing radiation, its discovery, health effects, and serve as points of contact in their communities. Their information is very prominently posted at each of the monitoring stations, as well as on brochures that are available at these stations, which contain contact information not only for their local representatives, but information for myself, information for the Department of Energy's Public Affairs Office. We try to make many people very, very accessible on this program, because one of the missions, beyond having a hands-on role for the public in this program, is maximum transparency of the monitoring data. When DRI first was involved in this program, as I mentioned, our primary role was identifying the members of the public, setting up town hall meetings. EPA at the time was the ones who were entirely responsible for the technical operation of the program. That included maintenance of the stations, a collection of what were then high volume air samplers that were also running at many of the stations, and some of the other sensitive samples. The Department of Energy was primarily a funder of the program, as they are today through their National Nuclear Security Administration. In 1999, the technical operation of the program transitioned entirely over to the Desert Research Institute, and that's when I came onto the program. Is that year. And one of the things that DRI did when we took over the program from EPA was to upgrade the monitoring stations so that they all had real-time or near real-time communications capabilities. And also we developed a public website that would transmit the data as quickly as every 10 minutes, in most cases, to as infrequently as once every hour, which is still not bad, I think, in the cases of stations that are on satellite transmission. But what this allowed us to do was to provide the monitoring data, including the background gamma radiation data, in near real time to the public. So the public was seeing the data, and does see the data today, as soon as the federal government, as soon as the Department of Energy, as soon as anybody else does, which provides, I think, an additional layer of transparency and confidence in the data that might be absent otherwise. Another thing that we did when we took over the program was to install a full suite of meteorological equipment at each of the monitoring stations. And at the time, it was strictly radiation monitoring data, with the exception of a barometer as well at the station. And we added sensors for precipitation, for temperature, for humidity, for solar radiation, for wind speed and direction, and made all of these sensor data available online as well, because we knew that if we were going to provide the real-time gamma radiation data to the public, we would need to be measuring meteorological parameters and provide those as well, because there are certain changes in meteorological conditions that can result in an increase in your background gamma radiation that is not at all related to anything coming from the site or past nuclear testing, but has everything to do with rainout of natural occurring radionuclides that occur ubiquitously throughout the world every time that there's a precipitation event. And so with the website we've developed, you're able to go in and literally graph all of these parameters against one another, look at the storms as they come in. You can see the background radiation go up a little bit, and that's largely because as the barometric pressure lowers, you have more radon gas that escapes from the underground environment, and some of its progeny, that is the radionuclides that decay into other radionuclides. Some of them are very short-lived, but they are measurable, and you can see those as they settle out on the instruments, and they decay very, very quickly after the rainfall event is over. I'll show you some examples as we look at the website here in just a little bit. So by and large, that was kind of one of the major changes in the program, and DRI has been responsible for the technical operations since that time, which means that for all the stations in the network, you can literally go back near more than 20 years for each of those stations. All of the data that has been collected is archived on the website, and so that you can see not only the real-time data and the hour-by-hour data for today, but you can select any specific day in the past or group of days or weeks or months and check out these parameters. We have a lot of school teachers that use them for things like, can we see global climate change? Can we see warming of temperatures at our community station over the past 20 years? You can produce some really nice products to see if there are any identifiable trends in those areas. So that was a pretty major change. We also provide a number of other things through the website that I will get to when I talk about it. But by and large, the network today consists of 24 stations that continuously report data. 23 of those stations are in communities or at ranch sites. And for each one of those 23 communities, we do have 2 people who are technically employees of the Desert Research Institute that live in those communities, who are responsible for making sure the station is operating normally. We don't ask them to change out any parts or do any electrical work, but they are often the first notifiers if something is going a little bit wrong at a station. They will let us know, and it saves us a tremendous amount of programmatic costs, quite frankly, to have individuals in the community who are willing to take on the responsibilities of making sure the station is operating normally, collecting those filter samples, which used to be done on a weekly basis, but now are bi-weekly. It's a tremendous cost to have an individual go out over what is essentially, I think, a 160,000 square kilometer area of southern Nevada, southwestern Utah, and southeastern California to collect from these stations. So we've realized real cost efficiencies with their participation in the program. And today we send a technician about once every quarter out to make sure that the station is responding properly to be able to detect radiation that's in the environment. The radiation equipment that currently exists at the station consists of a pressurized ion chamber, which is a sphere-sized, about basketball a basketball-sized sphere that is filled with pressurized argon gas to increase the chances that a gamma ray coming through will interact with an atom of that gas, and that generates an electrical pulse that is measured by the sensor and then converted into basically an exposure rate in the air at that location. So what you're seeing when you look at those numbers at the station basically is the exposure in air from gamma radiation. And you'll notice when we look at the website a little later on, in case I forget to mention it, that there's a fair amount of variation, probably maybe 100% increase from the lowest average readings in our, I think Pahrump has the lowest background gamma readings to our highest readings which are at Warm Springs Summit at our station there. And that has everything to do with differences in naturally occurring radionuclides, nothing to do with past nuclear testing or other man-made radionuclides, everything to do with things like local geology, as well as the altitude of some of those stations. The higher you are in altitude, the more ionizing radiation you're getting from outer space, which is why Denver has a background gamma radiation rate about 3 times what Las Vegas does. And that's primarily because of altitude, but also because of the local geology. One of the things you may have heard in my introduction was a little bit on my archaeological background, and that my degrees are in anthropology. And you may be asking, how in the world did an archaeologist get involved in a radiation monitoring program? And so I like to tell a little bit of that story because it will probably get asked later on if I don't. But my background professionally is in archaeology, and I originally came to DRI in 1991 to manage cultural resources work out on the Yucca Mountain program for DRI, which meant I went out ahead of any ground disturbing projects that DOE had plans for on the Yucca Mountain project with a crew of other archaeologists, would record artifacts on the ground, identify important sites, ensure that those important sites did not get destroyed without being properly recorded if for some reason DOE absolutely could not move its activity. And coming out of graduate school at Texas Tech, the big joke in my family was, if the archaeology doesn't work out for you, you've got your music to fall back on. Both of my parents are professional musicians, and I think I had decided early on it wasn't what I wanted to do for my main gig, but music's always been an important part of my life. And both of those things worked out pretty well for me. I got offered a job at DRI right out of graduate school in 1991 and came out to do archaeology and was involved with that project for 8 or 9 years, actually. And when I first came out and I did my interview and I was notified that I'd gotten the position, I was very excited, and I called my mom up and I said, guess what, Mom? I got a job doing archaeology. And she was so excited for me. And she says, where are you going to be? And I said, I'll be in Las Vegas. And there was kind of a big pause at the other end of the phone. And she's like, Las Vegas, is there any archaeology around there? And I said, well, of course there's archaeology around here. You know, people have been in the area for 12 or 13,000 years. And I said, but I'll actually be working out north of Las Vegas away, this place called the Nevada Test Site. Now, I'll have to admit my complete ignorance at the time with both what the Yucca Mountain project was and what the Nevada Test Site was. I had no clue about either one. And when I told my mom that, I think she almost started crying. And she said, don't you know what that is, Ted? She said, that is where they tested nuclear weapons. You know, we're at that time, we're still testing nuclear weapons. This is in 1991. And she started talking about cancer. And I started to get very, very concerned. It's a subject that hadn't come up, and I hadn't asked any questions. I was pretty ignorant about the issue. And I remember calling the committee chair back and I said, hey, what about this radiation issue? I kind of learned about the history of the site, and they said, don't worry, you'll be working about as far as you can from where the nuclear testing occurs and still actually be on the site, which was true. Yucca Mountain, for those of you that don't know, is not really a mountain. It's kind of a low sloping ridge line that you can actually see from Highway 95. If you're on the way to Beatty and look off to the east at one section, you can see Yucca Mountain right there from the highway. And I said, well, okay, sounds good. And my very first month on the job, I was out with a bunch of archaeologists, and we were doing what's called a flood chasing study. And this was a study where they were going to be looking at 100-year floods and 1,000-year floods. And if they had one of these events in some of the major drainages out on the site near Yucca Mountain, how would it affect a potential repository at the site? And in advance of these activities, which were going to involve a lot of people driving around on ATVs, one of the environmental studies that has to be done is an archaeological survey. So we were out walking along the ground, picking up, recording artifacts, and we don't only record prehistoric artifacts, we also record historic artifacts, which means old mining sites. There are stagecoach trails out along there where you can find cans and bottles that have been discarded from the stagecoach, things like that. So we also pick up pieces of metal and other things like that. And as we were walking along this large drainage, we were coming to what I thought looked like a pretty spooky installation up on the terrace. There were a couple large globe-shaped water towers, and there was a large outflow culvert, quite a few feet in diameter. And I kind of found myself wondering what had come out of that into the wash. And there was a large concrete berm that was built across the wash, and there was a steel door that was kind of hanging off its hinges in the berm, and there were some control panels and other things inside that we didn't check out too closely. And just before we got to this concrete berm, which had railroad tracks, basically, that was its function, to bring a railroad into this facility, we came to a single strand of fence wire that wasn't continuous across the wash. And we were following flagging that had been put down by EG&G, who were the contractors at the time that did the desert tortoise studies. So we knew we were in the right area because we were following this flagging tape that had been placed almost a year before. We saw no signage, and we went up over this concrete berm and down the other side, and came to another single strand of wire that wasn't continuous across the wash. And I heard one of the archaeologists to my left say, "Uh-oh." Now, "uh-oh" is one of the several phrases that you don't want to hear when you're walking around out on a nuclear test area, right? And so, we immediately all looked over to him, and he had picked up a metal sign that was lying face down on the ground that said, "Danger, radiation area, keep out." And so this is my first month on the job. I've just traipsed either through this area or was about to go in the area. We didn't know it at the time, that was supposed to be marked as a radiation area. And so we walked back through the area we had come through, back to the field operations center, and reported what had happened. I said, "Oh, don't you know you're not supposed to go through that area?" And it turned out this was the old part of the nuclear rocket testing area, which is in Area 25, which is the southwest corner there where Yucca Mountain occurs. And in one of the experiments, they'd allowed the reactor essentially to go critical and blow up on the pad, and so scattered radioactive fuel rods around. And it had been cleaned up, to specs at the time, but there were still little radioactive pieces here and there. And so, needless to say, I didn't tell my mom this story for almost 8 years, because I think it would have scared her to death. But I was always worried myself. Even though they scoped us out, we did what's called a whole body count, where they have you lie very quietly for an hour or so in a room that is very radiologically quiet, because it's constructed of pre-World War II battleship steel. So this is prior to the advent of nuclear weapons and testing. And so a lot of the radionuclides that were produced during that era that went into the atmosphere and that you can find in all sorts of building materials since were not present in that steel. And so everything that's being measured is actually coming out of your body, which includes mostly naturally occurring radioactivity in most people's cases. And while that scoped out completely normally, I always wondered, what I might have been exposed to and what the effects might be of that incident and later work out on the site. And so in 1999, when the opportunity came up to get involved in this program, I jumped at the chance to self-educate myself, quite frankly, about this issue. I also liked the fact that there was a huge public educational component to it. I am a huge proponent of bringing science to the public in an understandable form. Most of the dollars that are spent on scientific research in this country are federal dollars, so they are the public's dollars, and it behooves all of us as scientists to do a better job, I think, of communicating with the public what it is we're using their tax dollars for research-wise. And so I found that part of the program tremendously appealing. And while I knew absolutely nothing about the issue of radioactivity coming on to this program, I had people working for me and with me and in conjunction with other agencies who brought me up to speed very quickly over the next year or two. And my primary responsibility, again, was to interface with members of the public. And in some ways, I was a little bit of an ideal choice at the time, simply because I come, I think, from the same standpoint that most of the general public has when they hear the word radioactivity. I remember my mom very clearly telling me, when I was a little kid, the thing I was most worried about was the bomb. I don't remember saying that, but I guess I did. And I think there's a lot of fear that's engendered by that word. I think there's a lot of general lack of understanding about what we know about health effects and what we don't. And quite frankly, at the time I joined, I was worried about myself. And as I became educated myself on this program and talked to some of the top scientists in the world, quite frankly, who have dealt with this issue, I became very comfortable talking about it, running this program and talking with the people in the public. I'll take a little pause there, I think, maybe before I jump to the website, because I do want to spend 10 minutes or so navigating around in some areas of the website so that you know how to get to this information after my talk this evening, and you can share it with other friends. So, Joe, I guess we'll open it up to questions, or if you've got some questions that have come up during this time, I'm happy to answer some as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ted. And as Ted has mentioned, we'll open up for questions in the chat box. I do have a couple questions that I'd like to ask you. One of the first ones is, talking about joining the program in 1999. Now, over those years, what are some of the watershed moments of CEMP and some of the highlights for you during that time? So what sticks out to you for important ones for CEMP following 99, but also moments for you that kind of stood out?
Yeah, thank you for that, Joe. There have been a number, actually. And, one of the questions I most often get is, well, they stopped testing in 1992. Why is this program even still out there? And we do, of course, monitor for a lot less than we did when the program was ongoing, but it has continued to be a very important public educational and informational and public confidence building vehicle, because while we're no longer testing, there are obviously areas of the site that still have contamination from past testing and other activities. And one of the things that was learned pretty quickly when testing stopped and they started talking about dismantling the network, there was quite an outcry in some of the communities because some people thought, well, what are they not telling us? They're taking out the stations. We like knowing what the readings are and that we're not being affected by something coming off the test site. So there was, a long entrenched fear and mistrust that had been there before that persisted for some time and still does among some people that live in some of the downwind communities. And so to have those there to confirm basically that what we're seeing is a normal background readings and that there's nothing blowing off in large windstorms is important. And one of the, I think, maybe the watershed moment for the program during my tenure would have to be during the accident at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant in Japan. Very, very serious accident, involved a meltdown of multiple cores. It was a situation, if everyone remembers, where a tremendous earthquake, I believe it was 9.0, 9.1 or something like that. The plants were designed, I think, to withstand a magnitude 8, and they actually withstood the earthquake itself pretty well, even at a magnitude 9. But what they did not withstand is the kind of the mega tsunami that was produced by that earthquake and overtopped the seawall, I think, by, I don't know, I think maybe a good 4 or 5 meters at least. And the tsunami caused tremendous damage to the plants and caused the backup generator systems that pumped water through the system to cool them to stop functioning. And you had a resultant meltdown and the production of a radioactive cloud that went into the atmosphere and went where the wind blew, essentially. And the CEMP network was actually identified in a press release by the governor as one of the networks in operation in the state that would be looking at this. And they had predicted originally, I think, that we might see an effect of some plume from that accident within 10 or 11 days after the accident. But in fact, within about 5 days, some folks at UNLV who had set up a high volume air sampler, and I should say that today the equipment consists not only of the pressurized ion chamber, which I mentioned, but environmental thermoluminescent dosimeters, which are collected quarterly, as well as a continuously running low volume air sampler. They had set up some high volume air samplers, and within 5 or 5.5 days of that accident, they had begun picking up some I can't remember if it was radioactive iodine or cesium at the time that they were pretty certain was coming from Japan. And so at that time, we proactively collected our air filter samples that we had running across the network and sent them into UNLV. And sure enough, at that point, we started detecting. We were the first actually to publicly report this. UNLV, for whatever reason, decided not to publicly report it. I think that was a mistake, quite frankly, especially when you're trying to be transparent on these type of issues and have this rapport established. So we were the first to publicly report detection of radionuclides from Japan as a result of that accident. And I call this a watershed moment because it's important for several reasons. Number one, it showed that, even though we were a couple decades out beyond when testing had stopped, the equipment was still functioning as it was supposed to. We were able to detect radionuclides of concern from an event that had happened several thousand miles away. And yet, during this same time, we're not detecting any radionuclides of concern from a place right up the road where we tested nuclear weapons for 4 decades, right? So it was both a confirmation, a confidence building thing for the public, as well as good for DOE to show that, efforts to keep contamination on site were working and that we were not seeing these materials go into the public. Another important role that the CEMP helped fulfill during this time was we were able to use our public participants to get information out to all of their communities to please not go out and buy potassium iodide pills. There was a huge run on potassium iodide pills, which are really only good as a preventative prophylactic to protect you specifically against radioactive iodine, which concentrates in the thyroid. And while we were seeing radioactive iodine, the amounts of radioactivity in general we were seeing from Japan, while we knew they were from Japan, were still thousands to millions of times less than the ionizing radiation we're all exposed 24/7 to from the natural environment. So it was real important to get the message out. You had people who were literally experiencing some really severe side effects from popping potassium iodide pills, and they certainly didn't need any protection, nor for that matter did most of the people in Japan. It was very specific to the area around the plant, and the Japanese are fantastic about emergency response. In fact, the main criticism is that they really evacuated too many people in a wider group, and that has a whole history. We could spend a whole hour talking on that issue. But no direct deaths as a result of radioactive contamination or poisoning in Japan, but literally over 2,000 deaths directly associated with the evacuation itself, and things like suicides and things like that were tragic, that really didn't have to happen as well, and were largely there at least in part because of the fear factor and people's reaction to it. So I'd say that was probably the watershed moment for the CEMP. I worked with colleagues a little bit on the public network that sprang up, the SafeNest network that sprang up in Japan as a result of that network. And it was another situation where putting instruments and information and data in the hands of the public helped to allay concern that otherwise doesn't need to be there, and can have more deleterious effects sometimes than the fallout itself, for example. So that's one that comes to mind. Oh, here's a question I see here. Should I just read it? Do you want to read it, Joe?
Oh, I can read it. Thank you so much for answering that question. It's good to hear that a lot of confidence was built among the public in the program itself. So I appreciate you kind of giving us behind the scenes look at that and how the communities were involved. That's fantastic. We do have a question, as you mentioned. Have any samples come up abnormal enough to be of concern since the project started in the 1980s?
So the answer to that is yes. We have had incidents of concern since the program started in the 80s. Some of those were not exactly of concern, but simply verification, really, of things that had happened somewhere else in the world. For example, when Chernobyl happened, my understanding, and this is long before my tenure on the program, but my understanding was that the instrumentation at the CEMP station actually tracked radionuclides from the plume generated by Chernobyl 2 times around the globe. So, we have a lot of sensitive equipment and sensitive counting that goes on of the filters. And so they were actually able to detect those as a result of Chernobyl. I would say, one of the most concerning events that turned out to be a non-event was a malfunction we had in a station in Milford, Utah, our Milford, Utah station. And I'll point that out here in a bit on the map. But we had a situation where there was a thunderstorm locally. We had a lightning strike very near the station that started what became at the time, and maybe still is, Utah's largest wildfire in history. And almost concurrent with that event, we had our pressurized ion chamber, which measures your background gamma, start jumping up to levels that were anywhere from 5 to 7 times normal background. Now, while these are not levels of concern from a health and safety point, they are significant enough and way beyond what you would see, for example, in the natural events I talked about with precipitation events, that we, the first reaction was, are we seeing resuspension of radionuclides associated with past nuclear testing, that may have contaminated a downwind area of Utah and then been resuspended when this massive fire was burning. And so we actually encouraged DOE to put together a press release to announce that we had seen this situation and were investigating it. Literally within a day of sending out that press release, we realized that it was an actual malfunction at the station. We were able to show that the pressurized ion chamber had actually started to malfunction a full 12 hours before the lightning strike happened. And fortunately, as a confirmation, we had again, these air samplers running at all of these stations, so we could collect the air sampler, get it proactively counted, not only at UNLV's lab, but at the national, at an independent lab we use nationally out of St. Louis, and determined that while there was more smoke and particle loading on that filter as a result of the fire, the background radiation we saw in those samples was essentially identical to what we'd seen in the baseline for years. So that was and then ultimately we had the ion chamber itself checked out, and one of the CEMP pins had warped away and was shorting inside, we think just from excessive heat, although we're not sure what caused it. So we were able to have multiple lines of confirmation to show it wasn't an actual radiological event, but it did cause a couple months of meetings, and I reported to the Utah Radiation Control Board, did a presentation to them. We've had other minor things throughout the year that haven't necessarily involved incidents, but mostly concerns of companies, for example, that were moving to St. George and had heard about past radioactivity and was it going to be safe for them and their employees, that the locals as well as the program itself helped mitigate. And I see we can take one or two more questions. Can I zoom to the website so I at least get a little bit of that in before we're finished, Joe? Is that all right?
Absolutely. And I was actually, as you bring that up, I was going to ask you a question about other resources. I know you had mentioned you were going to show us the website, which is going to be great to see exactly what, anybody can go on to that site and check out any of the information. But also, is there other resources that people can access to learn more about radiation, maybe some reference materials, or also just background information on CEMP?
Sure, and actually all of what you just mentioned is available through our website. I'll mention too, all of these stations, and it is the, first I'll ask, is my website showing up? Do you see that okay? I'm going to assume that's a yes.
Yes, we're good. I just wanted to double check, but yes, we see it. Thank you so much.
Okay, very good. So this is the default homepage that you'll see if you go to cemp.dri.edu. And this shows you where all of the station locations are across southern Nevada, 1 in southeastern California, 4 in southwestern Utah. Each one of these has a station. You'll notice over here this little synopsis of the data collection program, and you can click on this more button. It has a brief history of the program, more information on it. Also a link if you would like a presentation for your organization or your school, class, anything like that. We are funded to do lots of public outreach on this program, so we would encourage you to fill out one of those requests. Also, you'll notice a menu here across the top, and there's one that has educational info link, and I'll just click on that briefly, and we have these arranged by kind of educational levels. So things that are appropriate for middle school, junior high, for high school, higher education, related links to radiation and health, research sources, university training programs. We have links in here also to the Nevada National Security site, all of the past environmental reports, which include data from past monitoring activities of the CEMP itself as well. And while we don't endorse any of these sites, we have at least vetted them and believe them to be good, accurate, scientifically valid sources of information for learning all sorts of things about ionizing radiation. Also, back on our homepage here, we do have some resources. I'm not sure if it's been posted yet. Let me refresh this page. My apologies. We have an annual workshop where and I don't see it listed. It will be very soon. In 2020, we had a kind of our pandemic online workshop. And so it consists of a number of videos over the course of two days that are wonderful resources on ionizing radiation, on the history of this program, and done by subject matter experts, as well as some presentations by the Department of Energy on ongoing activities out at the site today. That will be posted within the next couple days. I don't see it on there now, but I want to give you an example of what happens when you click on any of these station sites. And let's just pick Las Vegas, since that's where I am now. And so what happens is it will produce a default page like this, which is the hour by hour data from midnight last night, essentially up till almost 7 p.m. now. In another 10 minutes, it will update through 7 o'clock. It has your hourly average data for things like the wind speed, direction, gust, air temperature, relative humidity, barometric pressure, your gamma radiation, and also your total precipitation. And then beyond that, you can see the highs and lows, the minimum and maximum for each of those variables. You can use the arrows here at the top to navigate backward and forward day to day. And you can use some of these links, for example, at the left, we can do the daily summary, and let's see what Las Vegas was like on January 3rd of 2009. I don't know why, but we'll submit that info. And here's January 3rd, 2009. So it's great, either for personal or school projects to get back to these data. I want to also give you an example. I'm going to click on the advanced tab because not only is this great for casual users, it's great for professional users as well. And I can select here something called a time series graph, which allows me again to select a specific day. And I'm going to choose December 16th of 2020, because I think that's when we actually broke our big drought here in Las Vegas. Let's do 2 days, starting with this day, and I'm going to select the variables of barometric pressure, precipitation, and your average gamma radiation. And then I'm going to select down here, overlay the elements on a single graph. Now I'm going to create that graph, and hopefully we'll see it show up. Perfect. Excellent. So here's December 16th and December 17th of this past year with those three variables selected. The red is your barometric pressure. You can see a long decline throughout really over the course of 2 days until the afternoon, early evening of December 17th. Looks like around maybe 5 or 6 o'clock. Your green is your average background gamma radiation, which is fairly constant over this time period. All of a sudden you have the barometric pressure hit that low. The blue is your precipitation event, and the green is your background gamma radiation, which you'll see goes up for a period of an hour or two after that rainfall event. You have the rainfall, rain out of naturally occurring radionuclides that fall on that sensor. And so you can do some really neat stuff with this program. Again, you could select any of these variables. I could choose this for 100 days, for example, if I wanted to show that. I can also look at station info and photos. This gives you an example of what the station at Las Vegas looks like, and I'd encourage you to drop by anytime. And it has a lot of interpretive signs that show you some of the real-time measurements being taken. You can also move your cursor over the compass here and look at the station from any direction, and it gives you an idea of the location and the setting. Some people want to use our stations for things like looking at wind farms or solar radiation. Some of them are not ideally suited. They're really suited to be very publicly, or cited to be very publicly accessible, and for things like showing the radiation background. And so obviously this is in the shadow of the building, and if you're looking at solar radiation for a certain part of the morning, it's not a good measurement. But those are just a few of the things and a few of the resources you can get to through the station or through the website. You can submit a presentation request, or simply contact us again through links on this site if you have any questions. Also lists information about our local station managers. Both of these guys have been with the program over 30 years. Both of them high school science teachers. One of them's retired, but still is very heavily involved in STEM education. So fantastic program. Again, I'm very accessible if you have any questions related to my presentation tonight or about other resources. Get a hold of me through the website, and hope you enjoyed it. And I hope maybe a year from now we can all be together and maybe have some community participants reminisce about their 30 or 40 years on the program, in addition to hearing me blab on. So,
Ted, thank you so much for going through the history of CEMP and the changes over time, and also taking us through the website and showcasing the type of information the public has access to. It's fantastic. And so we appreciate you coming in and speaking on behalf of the program itself. And thank you everybody on YouTube and Zoom joining us for Ted's wonderful presentation. And we hope you have a wonderful new year. And thank you again for joining us. And just a reminder, the National Atomic Testing Museum is open from Thursday through Sunday. And we open at 10 o'clock and we close at 4. And it's reservation only, and you can access and buy tickets on our website at nationalatomictestingmuseum.org. And Ted, would you like to share the website so they can access that, if so they can get the
sure. That's cemp.dri.edu. I'll put it up there again on the screen and kind of highlight it right there. You can also Google CEMP, and I think we're one of the top searches that come up for that particular acronym. We're pretty easy to find.
Perfect. Great. Well, thank you again for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you on our lecture series. Everybody, thank you again for joining us. Have a wonderful and safe evening. And as we said earlier, Happy New Year. We look forward to welcoming you to the museum whenever you'd like to visit. Thanks again.